Hi, and welcome to AWR, a bite-sized guide. My name's Sarah Gordon, but you're very welcome to call me H, as a lot of my friends do. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, usual places. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the agency worker regulations. They came to us initially from an EU directive and they came into force back in October 2011. The big question at the moment, obviously, is will Brexit mean that the AWR disappears? Very short answer, in my humble opinion, is no. Once we trigger Article 50 and go through the Brexit process, one of the things the government will do is enshrine a piece of legislation that basically brings in all EU-generated legislation and brings it within domestic legislation. So it won't matter whether it came from Europe or not, it will become enshrined in the UK domestic law. Will they make any changes? In all honesty, I very much doubt it. Brexit is going to be a big enough process in itself without tinkering with existing legislation. And the other thing to bear in mind is, especially in light of our current economy, moving towards a gig economy, all the court cases we're seeing at the moment with Uber, Deliveroo, City Sprint, taking away worker rights would be a very controversial and a very difficult and unpopular thing to do. So I'm going to work on the basis that the agency worker regulations are in place and they're pretty much here to stay, at least for the term. So, when do the agency worker regulations apply? The obvious part is they apply when an agency worker is supplied. I guess the clue there is in the title of the legislation. But they apply when an agency worker is supplied through a temporary work agency. A temporary work agency is obviously an employment business who's supplying the temp or the agency worker, but it also involves any other commercial entities in the chain that are involved in the supply and benefit financially or commercially from that supply. So it could mean that you're supplying to another agency to help them out to fulfill a requirement for their client. It could mean that you're supplying to a master vendor who is then supplying on to the client. It doesn't matter if there's more than one intermediary in that chain. Every organisation is considered to be a temporary work agency, and then at the end of the chain obviously you have the hirer to whom the agency worker is being supplied. So that's your supply chain. That's who the agency worker regulations apply to. The agency worker gets the benefit in terms of equal treatment, but it's the temporary work agency or agencies and the hirer who are responsible for doing that. And they're responsible for doing that when the worker has completed 12 weeks or more in the same or a broadly similar role for the same client. When we say broadly similar, we're thinking about the kind of situation where someone maybe has been an administrator in the marketing team for 6 weeks and then goes to be an administrator in the HR team for 6 weeks. That's 12 weeks as an administrator. That's a broadly similar role. Also, bearing in mind the complex structures that organisations sometimes have these days with different subsidiaries, with different trading names, it's worth making sure that you know who, in terms of the organisational entity, who is your hirer, who are you supplying to. It might be that the temporary worker goes to 2 different offices, but essentially they're supplying the same organisation overall. So that would mean that the qualifying period clock would run during any changes in assignment there. And don't they apply? So this is another very good question. The key exception is when the agency worker being supplied is genuinely self-employed. And by genuinely self-employed, I don't mean someone who says, oh yeah, I'm IR35 compliant. I mean someone who genuinely is not under the supervision, direction and control of the hirer. These are likely to be your interims, your consultants who are bringing genuine expertise to the client that the client doesn't already have. And because of that level of expertise, they may be using their own equipment, they may be using their own intellectual property, they may be using their own techniques. They are not being told what to do by the client. They are essentially dictating when, where and how they are going to bring about the outcomes that the client is looking for. They may be paid on a daily rate, they may be paid by the project, by the outcome. It's unlikely that someone who is being managed or supervised by an internal manager or team leader within an organisation would be viewed as genuinely self-employed. So don't just take the contractor's word for it or the worker's word for it. Do make sure that you have a really good understanding of what the assignment will actually look like in the real world. The regulations also don't apply when you've got an in-house staffing bank, so an organisation that may have its own internal talent pool of people that it just rings up every now and then when they need someone to come in and do a couple of days, few weeks work here and there. They're engaged on a casual basis. The reason the agency worker regulations don't apply is there is no temporary work agency in this case. It's just the organisation and the worker. It's a direct relationship. Then you've also got the situation where you've got on-site managed services who are using employed staff. So a catering company that sends its own catering staff to work on site with the hirer. So the contract is between the hirer and the outsourced service provider. And that outsourced service provider, a catering company or what have you, is using its own employees to go and work on site with the hirer. So they're not agency workers, essentially. That's the reason the AWR doesn't apply. The last exception that I want to talk about today is one that you've heard of. It's the Swedish derogation. It's also referred to sometimes as pay between assignments or PBA contracts. And this is where the agency will employ the agency worker. So they actually put them onto a contract of employment and they pay them between assignments at least 1 hour a week. After the first assignment, they must be paid at least 50% of the highest week's pay in the last 12 weeks. So it's one of those options that is completely legal, but not always terribly popular. The first reason it may not be popular is if the worker is not constantly on assignment, there will be lots of between assignment periods where the agency is incurring the cost of paying them for doing no work. So from that point of view, it's financially unattractive. It may be that the agency does not wish to incur the additional employment liability that you get with the Swedish derogation. Obviously, once the workers become employees, you start looking at things like notice periods, accruing unfair dismissal rights, redundancy rights, having to go through disciplinary and grievance procedures because they're your employees. So that's another reason it can be quite unpopular. There are some organisations who feel that they don't wish to use the Swedish derogation model from a conceptual point of view, because although it's a legal option, it's perfectly valid, there is nothing wrong with it in law at all. Their question is, why would you not want to give someone equal treatment or equal pay when they're doing equal work and adding equal value to the client? Having said that, the advantage of this assignment or this way of working is that if you have high demand workers who are never likely to be sitting at home between assignments, so in the current marketplace we might be talking about drivers, for example. If you've got an HGV driver, someone somewhere will give them some work to do. They're in very high demand. So this particular option may be a way of demonstrating your commitment potentially to your workers, saying that you want to employ them rather than engage them. That could be one way of selling this option to the worker. It's also a way of enabling clients who may not have the budget to engage workers at equal treatment rates, but they have some budget and they would like to be able to use workers. The Swedish derogation model is a way of allowing those opportunities to be created at a slightly lower cost. So from a commercial point of view, a lot of clients are very keen on this, but a lot of agencies are still not terribly keen for the reasons that we've just through. So what is equal treatment? The most obvious answer is it's all about money. If you are looking at equal treatment, the first thing that we're looking at is pay. So is the pay rate, whether it's hourly or daily, equivalent to what that person would earn as a salary if they were employed on day one? So are we making sure that if they were to hire a permanent person to do this exact same job today, what would that salary be? And are we making sure that the pay rate to the agency worker is the same? The other element of money is bonuses and commission. And as it says on the slide here, individual bonus and commission falls under equal treatment. So if it's something that's directly related to what that particular agency worker is doing, then they are entitled to equal treatment. Using the example of an agency worker being a temporary salesperson for a caravan firm, for example, if a permanent member of staff sells a caravan, they get £250. If an agency worker sells a caravan, they get £250. If, however, there was a team bonus that said, okay guys, you sell 100 caravans this month, everybody gets £250. Because it's a team bonus, the agency worker is not entitled to that. So it's making sure that there's equal treatment regarding any individual bonus or commission or piece rate. The next element of equal treatment is time. Obviously, the working time regulations apply, so equal treatment around things like rest periods, night work, shift allowances, those kind of things. But also importantly, annual leave. Typically, workers are entitled to the statutory minimum of 28 days or 5.6 weeks annual leave per year. Now, if the permanent staff in an organisation are entitled to 25 days plus 8 bank holidays, that brings us up to 33 days a year rather than 28 days a year. This is going to impact on how you calculate your charge rates. Obviously, the statutory holiday entitlement of 28 days is calculated as 12.07% uplift on pay. If you're looking at a higher holiday entitlement, say 33 days, then your percentage is going to go up to, in this example, 14.54%. So it's always important to bear that in mind when you're calculating your charge rates for AWR compliance. The last element of equal treatment that I want to discuss today sits around parental rights. So after 12 weeks, agency workers become entitled to paid antenatal appointments, and that includes travelling and waiting time, I'm afraid. You are entitled to ask for the agency worker to bring written proof of their appointments in order to generate pay. You are also entitled to ask them, wherever possible, to arrange those appointments at the beginning or the end of day so as to cause minimum disruption to your client. Obviously, that's going to depend on availability of health services in the local area. The other thing to bear in mind is if you do a risk assessment once a worker makes you aware of their pregnancy status, and it is deemed that the assignment they are in is unsafe either for the unborn child or for themselves, legally you are obliged to either offer them suitable alternative work, or if you can't offer suitable alternative work, you must pay them until the end of their assignment that they're in. So if the assignment wasn't due to end for another 4 months, you have to pay them 4 months worth of pay. And obviously the liability to make that payment lies with the agency, not with the client. So you could find that you're paying for 4 months of work for this agency worker and also having to find someone else to go in to the client to complete the assignment. Now, you have to use your common sense when you're looking at what is suitable alternative work. If someone, for example, was a top-level lab assistant and you offer them, catering assistant work on national minimum wage, they would argue that is not suitable alternative work to someone who was in a very highly skilled role at a very high pay rate. So use your common sense when you're looking at offering suitable alternative work. Assuming you've offered something reasonable, if the agency worker turns it down, you don't have to pay them to the end of their assignment. So it's your responsibility to do your best to find them something else. If you can't find them anything, you have to pay them. If you can find them something but they don't want it, your liability to pay them comes to an end. So all of those equal treatment situations, the pay, bonus and commission, working time, annual leave, and all the pregnancy related and parental related rights, they fall to you, the temporary work agency and the hirer. And if there are other people in the chain, other temporary work agencies, they are also responsible for making sure that this equal treatment is delivered. So then we move on to the rights that the agency worker regulations give agency workers before they've even completed 12 weeks. These are rights that are available from day one. And they are, in summary, collective facilities available at the client. So what does collective facilities mean? That's things like your canteen, parking space, a shuttle bus from the local train station, a creche. Those sorts of things have to be made available to the agency worker from day one. Also, they have to be informed about internal vacancies in the same way that the permanent staff there are informed. So if the internal vacancies are advertised on an intranet, the agency workers must have access at least to that part of the intranet where they advertise the jobs. If they're advertised on a notice board in the kitchen, the agency worker has to be able to access that notice board. So from a commercial point of view, if you're keeping in touch with your agency workers while they're on assignment on a regular basis, as you should, maintaining that really good, healthy relationship, then it may be that those agency workers can give you the heads up of what the client might be recruiting for should that internal recruitment process not bear fruit. So it's a very useful thing for you to know, and very useful thing obviously for the workers as well. It doesn't automatically give them an entitlement to be interviewed for those jobs, but at least it gives them an awareness of what they might be able to apply for. Those day one rights are actually the responsibility of the hirer. Now, there is a temptation, I think, sometimes with HR people to look at agency worker regulations and mentally just think, oh, agency worker, I'm not an agency, I don't actually supply temps, so that will just be for the agency and for the worker to worry about. But actually, these day one rights are fully the responsibility of the hirer, but as recruiters we can be helping them to understand their liabilities. So let's go back to the idea of the qualifying period. The qualifying period runs for 12 weeks, but there are instances where it may stop, there are instances where it may pause, and there may be instances where it keeps going even when the worker's not working. So let's have a look at some of those. The first situation is where the clock might stop or reset. If someone moves into a completely different job, so let's say that they've been on assignment as a fully qualified accountant and they go in, it's highly unlikely, but let's say they go back in as a cleaner. Those are very different jobs. So the clock would effectively stop and reset and start running again at the beginning of the second assignment as a cleaner. If there is a gap between assignments of more than 6 weeks, it's deemed that the clock has stopped and will restart when they go back in. If while they're on assignment, they go on parental leave or they have some pregnancy-related sickness absence, then the clock will keep ticking. So it's important to note that even if someone goes on maternity leave, for example, after 3 weeks, by the time they come back from maternity leave, they have more than reached their qualifying period. So they will be entitled to equal treatment on their return. The instances where the clock might pause would be things like sickness absence, annual leave, jury service, if there was a strike that meant that the agency worker couldn't go in to continue with their assignment, or if there was a planned business shutdown. So these are times where the clock just goes on hold. So if they were at 7 weeks, went on jury service for 2 months and came back, the clock would start again from 7 weeks. So it's important when you're looking at supplying workers that you have a really clear idea. Have they been supplied to this organisation before? If they haven't worked there for a little while, why? If it's a gap of more than 6 weeks, then the clock will have been deemed to have stopped and been reset, unless that gap was due to pregnancy-related absence, if they were on jury service, something like that. So it's really important that you have a clear idea if that worker has worked there before, when, for how long, and what's the reason for the gap since they last worked there. What if you get a complaint? Now, hopefully, when you are supplying agency workers, you will gather the information that you need in order to deliver equal treatment to the agency worker after 12 weeks. So you'll be asking loads of great quality questions around, Mr. Client, if you were to recruit this person permanently today, what would their starting salary be? Can you tell me what would the annual leave entitlement be for permanent members of staff with your organisation? Do any individual bonuses or commissions apply to this role? All those sorts of good quality questions. If you take that information and you pay and remunerate your agency workers accordingly, you shouldn't have a problem. Having said that, there will be instances where an agency worker you've explained on what basis you have calculated their pay rate and their holiday, but in the cafeteria they're talking to the lady who sits next to them and does pretty much the same job, and she's on loads more money than they are, and they get terribly angry and they go and talk to their friends who say, oh, you should bring a claim under the agency worker regulations. So if they ring you, you talk through, you try to explain why they are receiving equal treatment, but they still are insistent that they're not getting equal treatment, they might raise a formal complaint. So if that happens, if they complain and request information, they can do this, by the way, they can raise the issue anytime within 3 months from the date of alleged breach. You have 28 days to respond. This is not a negotiable deadline. This is something that's laid down by law. You can't say, oh, well, so-and-so's on holiday for 2 weeks, so, we'll come back to you in 35 days. You must respond within 28 days, and that response must contain all the relevant information explaining how you have calculated their equal treatment. So on the basis of what information is this equal treatment calculated? Now, your defence to any claim is going to be your audit trail. So within that 28 days, you've got a little reminder there of the statutory deadline. 28 days later, you must have responded. Your defence is your audit trail. So make sure at all stages in the process, when you are asking clients to provide you with the information on which to base your equal treatment, you keep a written record of that. If you go to court, if you get pulled into court for an equal treatment claim, if you can say, we asked the client what equal treatment would be, we asked them for the comparator information, this is what they gave us, we have acted entirely in accordance with this and based all our equal treatment on that, and it turns out that the reason the claim might succeed is because the client gave you wrong information, essentially that's your get out of jail free card. You can go home. It's the client who will then be answerable because they have failed to give the correct information to allow equal treatment to be delivered. So make sure you always ask for the comparator information. Make sure you always explain clearly to the agency worker that you are giving them equal treatment based on the information that the client has provided to you. If you do get a complaint, make sure you respond within 28 days. And make sure that your paper trail is robust and you shouldn't have any AWR problems. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a bit of a long one, but agency worker regulations I think is a topic that's worth spending just that little bit of extra time on. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on Twitter. My details are here below. Sarah H. Gordon on LinkedIn and at Sarah H. Gordon 1 on Twitter. If you have any questions that you'd like to run past me, if you would like more information on the different topic areas that I can cover in recruitment training, or if you would like some in-house consultancy, you're very welcome to give me a call on 07944 673 592. Thanks very much for listening, and I hope to see you again soon.